I have the honor and privilege of leading a very, very cool panel with some of our customers here today. And we're going to be talking about how do you work together with IT operations and risk. So before I start, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists to the stage, and then we'll get talking. So first up is Dan Conroy, who is our CTO for Raytheon. Next panelist is going to be Dave Damato, who's CISO of Aon. But last and certainly not least is Jim O'Connor, VP and CISO of Cargill. All right, thank you all for being here with me today.
Last session of the day.
Last session of the day before lunch.
All right.
So I'm going to start at the end here with you, Jim. And the first question I have is really kind of what the topic of our panel is all about. We see a lot of different organizational designs and structures across organizations between IT operations, security, and risk. How does your organization look?
Really, as we look across it, we're pretty integrated with all of the different teams. So definitely a focus certainly on our partners in IT and on the delivery side, but as well in our manufacturing space, we have people that are dedicated and focused there, and then very closely into our business operations to make sure that we're answering the questions there.
Yeah, and our goal is really to try to help organizations break down silos between teams. Have we been successful in doing that with you guys?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the big pieces is the depth and the richness of information that we get. And so as I think, I mentioned our manufacturing operations, if you think about the amount of information that Tanium can help pull through that, giving that real-time visibility in the manufacturing space to be able to understand, are we having a problem or are we trending to a problem? That is inherently useful across all of those spaces.
Very cool. Next, I'll ask you, Daniel, a question, which is, I know you've been a longtime customer of Tanium's for over 10 years now.
I'd say 10 plus, yeah.
10 plus years now. So if you can recall back to when you initially looked at Tanium and evaluated us, what were some of the initial challenges you were facing back then?
I think it's very similar to, the lots of folks here in the room. It's about getting, business outcomes. And what I mean by business outcomes could be risk, could be operational, could be financial. And so when we looked at the capabilities that Tanium had, it really drove all three, right? And so, there's a lot of challenges in the industry, about getting visibility. Mm-hmm. And driving visibility is hard at scale. And that's really what Tanium did. It worked well at scale.
Yeah. What are some of the things you think about today? What are some of the challenges that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, look, we've got, 50% of our workforce is working remote. Mm-hmm. And so we've got over 100,000 people that we're supporting and making sure that engineering, that those devices are working as designed. I think that's a huge challenge. This hybrid remote workforce has presented a lot of improvements for how we operate, but also have to be watched from an IT perspective. The employee experience, the delivery, how we refresh those assets, how we take care of them, and the care and feeding. So that's really kind of some of the challenges that the world that we live in today.
Yeah. Dave, a familiar face to the audience, hopefully. Dave was actually our former CISO at Tanium, obviously now CISO at Aon. So you've actually had the opportunity to run Tanium in two different environments.
I have, yeah. I used to run it internally, so I got a lot of experience there, and now I get to run it in a very large organization.
So within the organization you run today, how is, and I know you're relatively new, so I'm not going to expect you to have all the
first 90 days, so yeah.
First 90 days, but what you've seen so far, can you share how Tanium is helping your teams to break down silos?
Yeah, and so, I have a consulting background, so sorry, I'm going to do my offering to the big four gods here, but people, process, technology, I always say it, but it's true. So when you think about convergence of the platform, from a people perspective, I used to run engineering teams, and these engineering teams would be completely integrated, so single-threaded teams are typically referred to, and you have developers doing security and infrastructure and code. And we don't really have that analogy for information technology in the enterprise. You have lots of different silos. And so what I really like about Tanium is that it brings different teams together from a people perspective. So I have IT and I have security and I have other groups, sometimes like compliance and others, legal, all using the similar tool to sort of bring you together. And you think about something like Conway's Law, which sort of says you sort of follow communications paths. Well, we're bringing these different organizations together, sort of forcing them to communicate. So it's kind of nice. It's a little bit fake DevOps, I'd say.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. So there's that. I think the process and technology is also interesting. So from a process perspective, and this is something I did when I was back at Tanium, you link together different systems. So you could have, very simple example, very simple, but I find a vulnerability with Tanium, and then I can either patch it automatically or send a ticket to ServiceNow so that my infrastructure team can then patch that when they need to, or they can simply let it be scheduled and patched, so that automation and process flow between different systems and integrations. And then from a tech perspective, I think the most helpful thing is there's all these different sources of truth. We have like 1 million panes of glass. Everyone's like, I want a single pane of glass, but now I have like 18 panes of glass. And so Tanium is the pane of glass that I rely on for assets and all their attributes from a device perspective, right? There's many different types of assets, but from a device perspective, I now have a source of truth that I can send to my CMDB. I can use to enrich in other platforms as well. So rather than trying to take 18 different solutions and centralize them and make the data fit together, I can actually rely on a single source of truth for at least 4 devices. And that's been awesome, even in my first 90 days, just having that ability.
Yeah, you must have been pretty excited walking in and already having Tanium installed and ready to operate within the teams.
I was, yeah. I get on, I do my demo and all the things. I can sort of
You're
ask
still ready to
questions.
demo?
Yeah, I got it.
Does he get a special helpline? Does he, since he works?
He gets a direct dial
Direct
into
dial, right.
I do have Orion's cell phone, yeah.
Or my cell phone.
He tells me not to call him, but
Okay. So Dan, I'll turn the question back over, or I'll turn the question over to you. So how are you optimizing your IT environment today using Tanium?
Yeah, I think one of the key things we're looking at is we've actually built out kind of a user experience dashboard within Tanium. So we're looking at the health of an asset, how much memory is running there, what processes are running. And we've actually turned up some automation where we're actually, we call it self-healing, which is where we're going after fixing the asset before the user has an issue. And so we actually have special dashboards by BU. And we have teams that are focused on making sure we get to those problems before they become an issue, either a help desk call or a cyber issue or whatnot. But that's been hugely valuable from that perspective. And it's provided a ton of what we call return on investment, because we're able to actually show how much productivity we're giving back to the business by keeping those systems online.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. And so Dave, I'll ask you another question. And you were talking about this yesterday, actually, on a different panel, but in the current kind of economic conditions that we're facing, and definitely looking into next year, you've already kind of shared with us, budgets are going to probably stay flat or decline in a lot of cases across IT organizations. So you've got to be obviously very selective in terms of who you work with and where you're prioritizing vendors. And so obviously you must have some criteria or kind of have some thought process you go through to figure that out. How are you going to prioritize vendors along?
Well, our ROI is definitely the first, right? So focusing on ROI, and there's so many like great stories around Tanium from an ROI perspective. Even walking in the door, the team's like, oh, we use it for this or that. But you think about like Log4j's and all these different vulnerabilities, and the challenge that we always had is vuln scanners work great until a library or a piece of software is not in the location it expects to find it. And then you need a tool that can go out and find it wherever it may be. And Tanium sort of that sort of break glass situation, find it, really easy way to justify return on investment. Like one of those and you've already paid for Tanium, right? But there's a number of other examples. I'd say the other thing too is looking at the number of capabilities that product satisfies. So Sunil Yu has the cyber defense matrix, which I use. I think it's a great solution to try and figure out, on the top you have your NIST cybersecurity framework. On the y-axis, you basically have asset types, and then you map all the different product solution sets that match to those capability areas. And it gives you a sense for what are the products that are actually like helping me across the board. And what you find is some are just like one little tiny thing, and then you find others have a breadth that sort of support you. And those are the tools that are gonna serve like 80, 90% of the controls that you need, and those are typically where I like to make investments from a platform perspective. And then support is the third one. So you look at the support you get from the vendor and how they help you grow and mature the solution. And obviously very familiar with the TAM organization. I think it's extremely unique because you're actually getting someone who will do and create things for you, which If I have to talk to my identity and access management vendor, that's a professional services SKU. I'm gonna have to pay them to do that. But now I can pick up the phone and call TAM and say, hey, I have a very unique request for a sensor. Can you help me develop that? And they're ready to help develop anything and sort of incorporate back into the library of tools, which is great.
I promise we did not stage that answer. We didn't even practice this, so thanks, Dave, I appreciate it. So Jim, same question back at you. I know you got a lot of vendors that you work with. How do you decide which ones to prioritize in your ecosystem?
Well, we do, and I'll follow on with what Dave said. Really, for us, it's more about a partnership versus a transaction. And so we have a pretty complex environment, highly distributed all over the world, up-to-date, modern, and legacy as well. And so across that breadth, it's really who can help us make sense of the environment, who can help us when we have those unique situations. Certainly if I think about things like Log4j in the past, to the point there was very little information, traditional tool sets and products took a long time to really kind of work around. And for us, being able to have something so quick and being able to work closely with the company to get to a custom solution for us was very important.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask each of you the same question. And the question really is, it's our kind of final question to wrap things up, is what pearls of wisdom can you leave the audience with today? Any key takeaways, final thoughts that you have that you can share with that group here?
I'll go first. I think the key differentiator when we're looking at return on investment or those different areas, I think a lot of teams struggle with, why they need a capability and what the financial return on is. I think the measurement of those key things, which you all covered about there, having someone measure that productivity and the experience of the availability of those assets is something that I see a lot of teams struggle with. And I think there's a variety of ways to do that. But I think when you go in and you're prioritizing what you want to go do, and you've got a set budget and a set number of capabilities, that should be right up there. Because then you can go in and say, hey, I want to do this, this, and this. And then you'll sit down with either your CFO, CIO, or whoever it may be, and you'll say, hey, this is the output of this, and this is the return on investment for this. And it becomes, you end up in a financial discussion, productivity discussion, which really helps you think about the different capabilities that you want to bring to the company. It's obviously from an asset perspective, a defense perspective, a capability, but at the end of the day, it's about making the company more productive from that area. So that's the area, a nugget I would say, is that teams got to spend more time on, and that will definitely help them in those conversations.
Yeah, tie it back to the business, right, at the end of the day.
Business outcomes and business case, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, Dave?
So since I'm in my first 90 days, maybe I can give some pearls of wisdom, going from a startup in the cryptocurrency industry to a 50,000 person Fortune 500 firm. And I think the thing I've found to be the most helpful is a couple of things. So one is really understanding our threat profile for the organization. Coming from a past and doing incident response, it's been a fun effort to really understand what are the risks, what are the threats that are going to be targeting us, who might they be, how might they do it, and understand that. The second is probably the most important, is a risk appetite, which is really a contract with your executive team to understand exactly how much security they want on our bus when we're driving. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of security. I can do a lot of security, I can do a little bit of security, but at the end of the day, we need to understand what the executive team really believes is the right amount of risk they want to accept, and then telling them how much of a security spend or investment is required to achieve that outcome. And so again, talking to outcomes, that's probably the most important thing that I've been doing so far, is really, we had a risk appetite, just refining it, gaining that understanding before I go off and start doing things. We have a contract together with the executive team, which has been just wildly helpful.
Yeah, and being a company that deals with risk every day, it's probably
yes, that also resonated very well. Yeah.
Yeah, that terminology is probably very easy to resonate back to the business.
Yep.
And so, what about for you, Jim?
Yeah, and I would say I would tie it back to the business outcomes as well. And if you start thinking about what those are and what's really important, and then how do we start tying our organizations into things that matter there, clear back into even whether it be IT operations or as we think about from a risk management standpoint, really focusing in very tightly on what those things are and how they can help to achieve that eventual outcome.
Well, I want to thank each of you for joining me up here on stage and sharing your stories and your journey with Tanium. And I also want to thank the audience here. Thank you for joining our panel session here today. Hopefully you learned some stuff from our customers on how they're using Tanium to achieve visibility across every endpoint, every workflow, and ensuring that we are defending against today's cyber challenges. So it's really about convergence. We heard that all throughout the morning. Tanium Converge Endpoint Management, that's the place to be.